Namaste everyone, welcome back to CodeCraft with Poonam. I am your coding mentor Poonam Agrawal. In the last video, we added pagination and sorting so our API returns data in pages instead of all at once, right? So that our API is now fast and professional. But there is one big problem. So right now, anyone on the internet can create a new recipe, okay, and update an existing recipe or delete a recipe, right? That is dangerous. So in real app, only authenticated users should be allowed to modify data, right? So anyone should be able to read recipes, but only logged in users should be able to write them. Okay. So today in this session, we are going to fix that using Spring Security. So for your better understanding, think of our API like a restaurant. Okay. So here, consider public users as customers, okay, who can walk in, look at the menu and read the dishes, right? So when they open this our URL like get all the recipes, okay, so it will open to everyone. No login needed, right? Till last session, we have directly accessed the recipes, right? There was no need to log in. So now what we are going to do is here in this session, authenticated users. Consider it as a chefs. Okay. So here chefs need to swipe the staff ID card before they can go into the kitchen and add, change or remove dishes. So like here we use post, put, delete methods, right? Which requires a username and password. So the security guard at the door is our Spring Security here. Okay, so it checks every request and decides, can this person enter? Okay, so now in this session, we are going to learn what Spring Security is, why we need it, and what authentication and authorization mean, how HTTP basic auth works, the simplest security model. So how to configure which endpoints are public and which are protected. And also we are going to see how Spring Security returns unauthorized for unauthenticated request and how to define in-memory users, that is no database needed it. And also here we are going to see how security config replaces Spring Security's default behavior. Okay, so now let's get started. So now coming to authentication and authorization. So here these two words sound similar, right? But mean very different things. Okay, so let's see. So here we are going to see this authentication versus authorization in user management. Okay, so first authentication. So first of all, what do you mean by authentication? So authentication is used to verify identity. It checks for the credentials. Okay. So now coming to authorization. What do you mean by this? So here authorization is nothing but which controls the access and assigns permissions. Okay. For your better understanding, authentication, what it is. So here authentication is nothing but who are you? Correct. So that means verifying that the person is who they claim to be. So in our case, we are going to check the username and password. So example, I am Chef Poonam with password some chef123. Okay. So now coming to authorization. So what it means? So in simple terms, what are you allowed to do? Okay. So here what that means is deciding what an authenticated person can access. Okay, so in our case, even logged in users can only do certain things. So, for example, only users with role admin can delete recipes, right? Other users cannot delete the recipes, only admin has the right. Okay, so In this session, we are going to cover both authentication with username and password and authorization by separating public get endpoints from protected, that is put, post, delete endpoints. Okay. So now coming to HTTP basic authentication. So here, what is HTTP basic authentication? So this means that HTTP basic auth is the simplest way to send credentials in a request. Okay. The client sends a header with every request. Okay. So for example, when you provide a username, then it will be encoded in base 64. Okay. So here then what will happen is then the server decodes it and checks if the username and password are valid. Okay, so this is perfect for learning. Why? Because there are no tokens or sessions to manage. It works directly in curl and postman. And also it is easy to understand before moving to JWT in later video. Okay, so in production apps, you would use JWT tokens instead of basic auth. So we will cover that in a future video. Okay, so for now, we are going to see this basic authentication. Okay. So, how do we implement this HTTP basic authentication? By first we are going to encode credentials, then it is sent as an authorization header, and then server decodes the credentials, and then it will validate the credentials, and then it will grant the access. Okay. Now coming to Spring Security's default setup. So here, what do you mean by Spring Security does by default? So here, when you add Spring Security to your project, it immediately protects all endpoints. Nothing is public by default. Okay. It generates a random password on startup and prints it to the console. Okay. So it creates a default user with username like user. Okay. So, and then it will show a login page for browser request. So this default behavior is useful to know, but we will replace it with our own custom configuration so that we can have full control. Okay. So here you can see that when you as soon as add the Spring Security to your project, then it will protect all the endpoints. Then it will generate a random password, and then it creates a default user, and then it shows a login page. Okay, so here protects all endpoints. That means nothing is public by default. And then it generates a random password, which is printed to the console on startup. Okay, and then it creates a default user, so username will be user. Okay, and then it shows a login page for browser request. So in this session, what we are building is we are building a public endpoints where no login is needed. Okay, and also what we are going to do, then we are going to protect the endpoints where login is required, and then in memory users will create it. Okay, using username and password. Okay, so now coming to key terms which you need to remember, that is authentication, which means that verifying who you are. Okay, and then authorization, which means what you are allowed to do, and then HTTP basic auth, which is used to send the credentials in the request header. Next, coming to 401 unauthorized, this is a status code. This will be displayed when you try to access when you are not yet logged in. Okay. And then 403 forbidden. This is displayed when you try to access when you are logged in but not allowed. And then coming to security filter chain. So this means that Spring's chain of security rules. User details service, here where the Spring looks up for the users. Okay, and then in memory users, here users stored in code, not in a database. Okay, so now we will have a code walkthrough. So before that, let me tell you the benefits of using the Spring security. Okay, so what will happen? Right now we are using Spring Security Basics. Okay, so here our API will be now. It is safe. Why? Because the right operations requires authentication now. Okay, and also it is professional. Why? Because it returns proper 401 JSON responses. And also it is a role ready. Okay, which is structured to add more roles later. Like for example, I have told you that admin, right? Admin is nothing but role. Okay, and then comes to production aware. So here the same pattern used in real Spring Boot applications. Okay. So in this session, we are going to add two new files and making one changes to our pom.xml file. Okay, and everything else from our last session stays exactly the same. Okay, so now here what we are going to add in our pom.xml is we are going to add Spring Boot starter security. Okay, so here go to the pom.c, you can see here. So here you can see that I have added one config folder in our recipe service. Okay, and then this is our same controller DTO exception model repository, and also here you can see that this is our another folder that is security which I have added, and this is same. Okay, and then coming to our pom.xml, here you can see that I have added this security, okay, dependency here. In dependencies, this is our dependency, that is Spring Boot starter security. Okay, in my previous videos I have already told you that how to add the dependencies. Okay, when you require some dependency later in your project. Okay, so you can check that video. Okay, so here this is the group ID and artifact ID, that is Spring Boot starter security. Okay, and then coming to our config folder. Okay, here we have this Java file security config.java. So here you can see that we have all the configurations at the rate configuration at the rate enable web security. Okay, so this is public class security config. So this is the new one which I have added. So here what it defines is public versus protected endpoints and in-memory users. Okay, and then here you can see that this is the another security folder I have added. Okay, so in this is the Java file, that is custom auth entry point.java. This one I have added here in this session. Okay, so here you can see this is of and this class is annotated with at the rate component. So the class here is public class custom auth entry point, which implements authentication entry point. So here it returns clean JSON like 401. Okay, instead of HTML. And rest of is same controller, DTO, exception, okay, model, this repository, service. Okay, rest of the things are same. So here when you add this dependency in pom.xml file, that is Spring Boot starter security, so what will happen is Spring Boot auto configures security as soon as this dependency is on the class path. Okay, so after adding this Spring Boot starter security dependency, we are going to create a security folder in our recipe service. Okay, in that we are going to create this file, that is custom auth entry point.java file. Okay, here what it does is this class controls what our API sends back when someone hits a protected endpoint without credentials. So by default, Spring Security returns an HTML login page. Okay, so that is fine for browser apps, but wrong for a REST API. So here we want a clean JSON instead. Okay, that's why here we are creating this class. So here this class is annotated with at the red component, and this is our class name, that is public class custom auth entry point, which implements authentication entry point. So here what do you mean by this authentication entry point? So here it is a Spring Securities hook that fires when an unauthenticated user tries to access a protected resource. So here you can see that this is our method, that is public void comments. Here we have given this HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response, and this is our authentication exception. Okay, so this which throws input output exception. So this method here we have annotated with @override. Okay, here we have used this override for this comments method. Why? Because to write our own JSON response directly to the output stream. Okay. So here you can see that this is the response dot set status http servlet response dot sa unauthorized. Okay, so this is used to set http status to 401 unauthorized, and then response dot set content type. So here media type dot application JSON value. So this is used to tell that the client we are sending JSON. Okay, and then here we have used map, that is, and then here you can see that here we have a map string comma object body. Okay, this is used to build the response body. So here a linked hash map is created. Okay, so in body what we are going to put is status, that's its value. Okay, so here key is status and its value is 401. Okay, and then body dot put, we are putting the message for for this 401 what should be the message, that is unauthorized, please provide valid credentials. Okay, and then body dot put, we are giving this timestamp local date time dot now dot to string, so we get in a string format. Okay, and then here we have used this object, and then here you can see that we have object mapper. Okay, here object here new object mapper is created. In mapper it is going to write the value, that is response dot get output stream and body. Okay, and then coming to this security config.java file. So here this security config.java file is the heart of our security setup. Why? Because here it does three things, that is, it defines which endpoints are public and which need authentication. Okay, and also here it sets up in-memory users with passwords and roles. And also here it configures HTTP basic auth and our custom 401 handler. Okay, so now coming to this class, that is our security config. Okay, so here you can see that here we have annotated this class with @configuration and @enable web security. So in my previous sessions, I have already explained you what is @configuration, right? So now we will, so I'm not going to explain it again. Okay, so now we are going to see what is this @enable web security. So here this web so here enable web security tells Spring that this class contains our security configuration. Okay, so it replaces Spring's default auto configuration. Okay, and then here you can see that here we have this private final custom auth entry point. Okay, and then this is our constructor. And here we have a method, that is public security filter chain. Security filter chain, here HTTP security, which throws exception. Okay, so here this method is annotated with @bean. Okay, so what here we are doing is we are defining the, so what here we are doing this is in security filter chain we are defining endpoints which accesses rules. Okay, so here, first of all, what do you mean by this security filter chain? So here, this security filter chain is where we write our rules. Okay, so think of it as a list of conditions Spring checks for every incoming request. Okay, so here in this we have HTTP. Okay, so here you can see that dot. So here in HTTP, you can see that HTTP, this dot CSRF Here we have given CSRF. Okay. This is our lambda expression, CSRF dot disable. So what do you mean by this here? So here this CRS, so here this CSRF is nothing but it is for nothing but it is a protection. Okay, so here the CSRF protection is for browser based form submissions. Okay, so here REST APIs using basic auth or tokens don't need it. Okay, so here you can see that dot authorize HTTP request. Here we have given auth. Okay, and then auth. So here you can see that auth dot request matches. So here we have given the pattern. Okay, and here we have given this h2 console, and then we have given that dot permit all. So here you can see that request matcher, this is the get method. Okay, so here you will get all the get requests on this URL which are open to everyone. So here anyone can read recipes without logging. Okay, so now coming to our dot request matcher, here we have mentioned post http method dot post, and then here you can see that dot authenticated. So what this means is now this is protected. Okay, as I already told you that for get it is a public, for post, put and delete it is protected. Okay, so here this post requires a valid login where only authenticated users can create a new recipes. Okay, and then here for this same, for this method put method, here also this is protected, so it requires a valid login and only authenticated users can update recipes, and similar with this delete method also. Okay, and then here you can see that this is our dot any request dot authenticated. That means that all other request also requires authentication. Okay, here dot any request. Okay, and then here you can see that this dot http basic. So here http basic dot authentication entry point, here we have mentioned this, here you can see that mentioned this custom auth entry point. So here what it does is it enables the http basic authentication. Okay, as I already explained you, what it will do is first the client sends the credentials to the authorization header, so that the format will be like this: authorization colon basic, this is base e4 base 64 username colon password. Okay, so first this will encode it. Okay, then what we are going to do is we are going to wire in our this custom auth entry point, so that when authentication fails we get JSON 401, not an HTML page. Okay, so here this HTTP basic, what it does is it enables HTTP basic authentication, and we pass our custom auth entry point, so that we will get the response which we have mentioned, that is 401. Okay, so 401 response is JSON and not in HTML. Okay, and now coming to another method, that is public user detail service. User detail service password encoder, password encoder. Okay, so here you can see that this I have annotated it with @bean. Okay, so here what we are doing is here we are storing users in memory. Okay, here no database table is needed, but in production you would load users from a database. Okay, so here you can see that here we have user details. User is equal to user dot builder dot username dot password dot roles dot build. So here we are creating this for the user. Okay, and password will be user123, and then role is user. Okay, so this is for a regular user who can read and write recipes. And then here we have another user details, that is called admin is equal to user.builder.username.password.roles.build. So here we are going to give the username as admin and password as admin123 and role as admin and then build. Okay, this is for users. Okay, and this is for admin. So here an admin users will have a elevated so here this admin will have a elevated privileges. Okay, and then here we are returning new in-memory user details manager. Here we are passing this user and admin. So as I told you that here in-memory user details manager stores the users in memory. Okay, here no database is needed. So when Spring Security calls this, when it needs to look to a So here this is called up by the screen. So this is called up by the Spring Security. Okay, when it needs to look up a user by a username. Okay. So, and then here you can see that this is another method, that's password encoder. Okay, so here this also we have annotated with this also annotated with @p. So here what we are doing, we are just simply returning this bcrypt password encoder. Okay, so here bcrypt password encoder means that here passwords are never stored as plain text. So here bcrypt hashes them. So even in memory, they are secure. Okay. So now what we are going to do, now we are going to start our application. Okay. So I'm not going to explain all other things because the rest of the things are same. Okay. So now go to this recipe service application, click on this run. So here you can see that our application got started. Okay. So now we will test our endpoints in our Postman. So here we will test our get method. Okay. So here we will test our get method. Okay. So here further http colon okay localhost colon 8080 slash API slash recipes. Okay. So when you click on send, see here you got all the content. Okay. All the recipes, that is aloo gobi, chana masala, dal tadka, gulab jamun, masala chai. Okay. With the status code as 200. Okay. That means this is successful. So here we have not logged in. Okay, so here anyone can access this recipes. Okay, so here in the as I told you that get is a public, right? So no credentials needed for get method, but for put post delete we need credentials, right? So now we will test our endpoint for the post which is protected, right? So now choose this post, okay, and then here body raw. So here we are going to add recipe, okay. So just I'm going to paste this name test. So here just I'm going to paste this. Okay. So here name is test, some sample recipe. So that for the testing purpose. Okay. Here. So here URL will be same. Okay. http colon slash slash localhost colon 8080 slash API slash recipes. So we are going to add a new recipe in our recipes. Okay. So now we are going to click send. So here you can see that in the body response body, what you got is status code as 401, message as unauthorized dot message as unauthorized. Please provide valid credentials and timestamp is given. Okay, so these things we have already provided, right? Already we have provided this, right? That's why it got displayed here. Okay. So here what is happening is the request never reaches the controller. Why? Because Spring Security rejected it first. Okay. So now we will check for the wrong credentials. Okay. So now what we are going to do is we are going to provide here authorization. Okay. Here choose basic. So here instead of this, what we are going to do is we are changing. We are giving wrong credentials. Okay. So some user one, and here you will give some user 1 2 3 4. Okay. So here when you will click when you click on send, then here you can see that what you got status as 401, message as unauthorized, please provide valid credentials, and timestamp is given. Okay. So this is for wrong credentials. So when you give correct one, then what will happen? So here we have already provided, right, for the username user and for the password user 123, right? So when you provide this correct one, okay, and we are trying to add recipes in our, and we are going to add new recipe in our recipes. Okay, so when you click on send, here you can see by giving correct credentials, this our new recipe got added in our recipes. Okay. So here with the ID 13 it got created. Okay. And now we will check for our delete method. Okay. For our valid credentials. So as you know that only admin can delete, right? Only admin has the right to delete. Okay. So here I'm going to delete the recipe which is present in ID 1. Okay. So now here username will be our admin. Okay. And the password is admin123. Okay. This is what we have given, right? So now when you click on this, and here we need to change this to delete. Okay. So we are deleting a recipe which is present in, which is here we are deleting a recipe by ID. Okay. So here first with ID 1 we are deleting. Okay. When you click on send here, so here you can see that status code is 204, no content. Okay. So now we will try to delete another recipe. Okay. So right now we have added uh, new recipe, right, with the ID 13. So we will try to delete that one. So here you give it as 13. Okay. Username is admin and password is admin123. Now when you click on send, here you can see status as 204, no content. Okay. That means it got deleted. Okay. So when you go and check here get method, okay, based on ID. So here we are going to check for the ID 13. Okay. Okay. So when you go and click on send, here you can see that status code as 404, message as recipe not found with ID 13. That means it got successfully deleted. Okay. With this timestamp, here you can see the status code as 404 not found. Okay. And same here you can check for the 1. Okay. Recipe 1. So here when you go and click send, same with the ID 1. Okay. Status code as 404, message is recipe not found with ID 1, timestamp. Status is 404 not found. Okay. So here we have seen that when we have provided valid credentials, okay, that is for the admin. So they have the access, right? That's why admin deleted the recipe, right? But now we are going to delete with no credentials. So what will happen? Let's see. Okay. So we are going to close this. Okay. Then now here go to this delete HTTP. Okay. So here we will try to delete another recipe by ID, that is here 2. Okay. So here we are not providing any authorization here. Okay. We are not going to give any credentials. Okay. Directly we will delete this. So here you can see that what it got displayed as status as 401, message unauthorized, please provide valid credentials, and timestamp is given. The status code is 401 unauthorized. Why? Because here only admin has right to delete. Okay. So here we have not provided any credentials. That's why Spring Security is not letting us to delete this recipe. Okay, by which is here we have mentioned 2 by ID 2. Okay, so this recipe cannot be deleted without authorization. Okay, without providing any value. So here you cannot delete a recipe without providing credentials. Okay. So this is for today's video. If you liked my teaching, then do let me know through comment and hit the like button and share it with your circle so that it will be helpful to them. And do not forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you will not miss any of my videos. Till then, keep learning, keep growing. This is Poonam Agrawal from CodeCraft with Poonam signing off.